My ex-wife, Allison, was unlike anyone I'd ever met. Her life seemed to be scripted from a movie, a combination of charm, chaos, and a recklessness that bordered on self-destructive. I knew she had a wild side when we first met, but I could never have predicted just how deeply that part of her would affect my life. Over the course of our tumultuous marriage, Allison's unpredictable behavior led to infidelity, manipulation, and even legal troubles that nearly destroyed me. This is the story of how I fought back and ultimately regained control of my life. Allison had 2 children from a previous marriage, and their father had tragically passed away from cancer when they were young. When we got married, I embraced them as my own, nurturing them alongside the daughter we had together. Despite Allison's erratic behavior, I tried to hold on, motivated by a desire to create the stable family I never had growing up. I made excuses for her mistakes and clung to the hope that things would improve. The breaking point, however, was far beyond what I had anticipated. By the time everything unraveled, I realized just how far her deceptions ran and how many boundaries I had allowed her to cross. From betrayal to false accusations that threatened my freedom, I reached a moment when I could no longer tolerate her manipulative games. That's when I decided it was time for payback. Our marriage started with promise. I had hoped that a fresh start would help Allison move past the toxic influences of her old life and create a stable home for our blended family. I took a promotion that required us to relocate far from the place she grew up, away from the network of people and behaviors that had been a problem for her. I believed this change would be good for both of us. But even after the move, her behavior didn't change much. She avoided getting a job and spent most of her time on hobbies like flipping furniture, which kept her constantly on the move to local shops and resale stores. One day, she introduced me to a man named Javier, an associate at one of the stores where she sourced furniture. He was young, about a decade younger than her, and had a friendly demeanor. Still, something about their interactions unsettled me. Allison's pattern of attention-seeking behavior made me wary, and my instincts were telling me this could be trouble. Months passed, and Allison's attention to her furniture business intensified. The late nights and constant errands became the norm, but she dismissed my questions with explanations about work and maintaining her independence. Our arguments became frequent and bitter, reaching their peak one night just before Thanksgiving. The fight was brutal, filled with accusations and threats. She even hinted at making false claims to CPS about my treatment of her children, claims that could ruin my life and separate me from my daughter. Realizing how dire things had become, I began to document everything. Secret recordings on my phone became my lifeline, capturing her threats and erratic behavior. Then, just a few days after that explosive argument, she managed to twist a text I had sent her into a narrative that got me arrested. The message read, "I'm done with this. It's time you face the consequences of your actions," which, in hindsight, sounded ominous. I had meant it as a warning that I intended to file for divorce, but she played it to her advantage, telling the police she feared for her safety. I spent the night in a holding cell and was released on bail the next day, but the damage was already done. She secured a temporary restraining order against me, forcing me out of my own home and keeping me away from my daughter. I was ordered to continue paying household bills while I figured out how to put my life back together. The situation was spiraling, and I was rapidly losing control of my own life. Forced out of my home and burdened with legal and financial obligations, I had 6 hours to collect what belongings I could before being effectively barred from the house. I packed my work essentials and a few personal items, but soon found myself contemplating how I could take back a measure of control, no matter how small. That's when I saw the trunk. Over our years together, Allison and I had accumulated an extensive and expensive collection of intimate items, stored in a large trunk that looked like it belonged to a magician. It was worth thousands of dollars and had been as much mine as hers. Remembering the times she flaunted her secret stashes of hidden favorites, I knew what to do. I scoured the house, finding every last item she valued, and packed them all into the trunk. This was a small act of defiance in a moment where I felt utterly powerless. Before heading out for my job, I drove to the hotel where I would be staying for the next few weeks. On the way, I spotted a large green dumpster behind the hotel. Without a second thought, I backed my truck up, hoisted the 80-pound trunk out, and heaved it into the dumpster. The act felt cathartic, like an exhale after holding my breath for too long. It wasn't going to change my reality, but it was a symbolic win, a small piece of control reclaimed from the chaos. The following week, I appeared in court for the initial hearing related to the arrest. Allison was there, playing the victim, requesting that the temporary restraining order be extended. The courts, unaware of the true nature of our relationship and without seeing the recordings I had, sided with her. I was ordered to stay away from my own home and my daughter until a proper hearing could be conducted. However, my documentation was about to pay off. My lawyer submitted the recordings as evidence, showing her threats and admissions that she had fabricated accusations. The temporary restraining order was lifted, and the charges against me were eventually dropped. Ironically, Allison had to write a letter to the district attorney stating she didn't fear for her safety anymore, just to ensure I could assist with the kids and help maintain the household finances while she struggled to find a job. Despite her manipulative attempts, she couldn't hold on to the lie for long. The damage to her credibility, coupled with the video evidence, shifted the divorce proceedings in my favor. Allison's facade began to crumble under the weight of her own deceit. I regained access to my daughter and started to piece my life back together, slowly but surely. But the climax of her unraveling came when I discovered the depth of her betrayal with Javier. When I returned home briefly under court supervision to gather more of my belongings, I found physical evidence that she had been with him in our bed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, definitive proof that our marriage was over. The final unraveling of our marriage was swift but painful. Discovering that Allison had brought Javier into our home, into the very bed we had shared, cemented my decision to sever all ties. Any lingering doubts or guilt about the divorce vanished, replaced by a cold determination to protect myself and my daughter from her toxic influence. With my lawyer's help, the divorce proceedings turned in my favor. The evidence I had gathered of her lies, manipulations, and infidelity was undeniable. Allison's claims in court fell apart, exposing the true nature of her character. The judge granted me full custody of our daughter, ensuring that she would grow up in a stable and safe environment. Allison's parental rights were limited, and she was left to face the consequences of her reckless choices. As the legal battle drew to a close, I learned through mutual acquaintances that her life had begun to spiral. With Javier out of the picture and her lies catching up to her, she struggled to maintain her lifestyle. She moved out of state with her older children, attempting to start over, but the reputation she had built followed her. Rumors of another failed relationship and financial troubles trickled back to me, but by then, I was too focused on rebuilding my life to pay them any mind. I finally had the peace I had been yearning for. The house, once filled with tension and deceit, became a home for my daughter and me, a place of laughter and healing. The small, symbolic act of dumping that trunk into the dumpster had marked the start of my recovery, a turning point where I chose to reclaim my power. It wasn't easy to move on, but step by step, I did. I learned to trust myself again and sought to create a life where my daughter would feel secure and loved. The experience left scars, but they became reminders of my resilience, proof that I had survived and come out stronger. As for Allison, her attempts to contact me over the years have been met with silence. I set boundaries that I refuse to cross. The chapter with her is closed, and while the memories may linger, they no longer hold the power to control my life. Dear listener, if you've reached this far, thank you for sharing in my journey. Your support means the world to me. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. It's a small act that makes a big difference.